take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
The Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation. Now, here's your host, Radical Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. It is Friday, March 19th, 2021, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. And today has to be the first time in my life I've ever uttered the phrase, "Go Oral Roberts!" If you're following March Madness, the NCAA tournament, we had an upset. Number 15, Oral Roberts, beat number 2, Ohio State. So I got to give my condolences to Left-Wing Larry, if he's out there anywhere in the media multiverse listening to this. My former roommate in Portland, Left-Wing Larry, big Ohio State Buckeyes fan. So sorry for the upset loss. But hey, that's the fun of March Madness. Shout out also to Herb Thrasher out there, who was chiding me for not making a bracket this year. I don't follow this stuff. He says, people that follow this stuff can't pick a bracket. What difference does it make? So I apologize. I'll do that next year. But hey, we got a jam-packed show for today. So let me get right to this, because the big news of the day splashed on the pages of all of the internet, now hitting CNN and Washington Post, is that the Biden administration has fired some staffers, let them go for their past marijuana use, and it's causing quite a brouhaha. I'm going to add to that in the Radical Rant, because there's news of Biden resisting legalization as a campaign plank and some racist tinge to it. So we'll talk about that. Also coming up on the show, Ammon Bundy learns that jail sucks. What do you know? And I've got the lowdown on that pot and PTSD study that you've heard about. But first, we got to get you up on all the news.
This is your Cannabis Headline News, brought to you every weekday by Radical Russ Radio at radicalruss.com, your 24-hour source for marijuana music and cannabis conversations. Subscribe today for just $4.20 at patreon.com/radicalruss. With your Cannabis Headline News for the week ending Friday, March 19th, 2021, I'm Russ Belville. A number of White House staffers were asked to resign or demoted for past marijuana use, regardless of whether those employees had been in one of the 14 states where the drug is legal, according to a report. The Biden administration had required workers to disclose past marijuana use on a background check form, but told some new hires that it would overlook those who answered yes, the Daily Beast reported. Despite this, White House Director of Management and Administration Ann Filippic reportedly led a series of one-on-one calls with staffers this month, asking those who admitted to past marijuana use to resign or be placed in a remote work program. Quote, "It's exclusively targeting younger staff and staff who came from states where it is legal," end quote, one former staffer told the Daily Beast. A bill to protect banks that serve as state legal marijuana businesses from being penalized by federal regulators has again been filed in the House. Representative Ed Perlmutter reintroduced the legislation, titled the Safe and Fair Enforcement Banking Act, or SAFE Banking Act. The measure cleared the House along largely bipartisan lines during the last Congress, but it did not advance in the Senate under Republican control. With Democrats now in control of the House, Senate, and White House, industry stakeholders are optimistic that the legislation stands a solid chance of becoming law this year. The SAFE Banking Act would ensure that financial institutions could take on cannabis business clients without facing federal penalties. President Joe Biden's leading candidate to be White House drug czar has played a critical role in overseeing the implementation and expansion of a state medical marijuana program, and has publicly recognized both the therapeutic and economic potential of cannabis reform. Rahul Gupta, the former chair of the West Virginia Medical Cannabis Advisory Board, who also served as the lead on drug policy in Biden's presidential transition team, is reportedly the top pick to head the Federal Office of National Drug Control Policy, according to Filter, though no formal announcement has yet been made. That said, harm reduction advocates have been quick to criticize Gupta's record, pointing out that during his time as commissioner for the West Virginia Department of Health and Human Resources Bureau for Public Health, he oversaw the decertification of a syringe access program that was designed to mitigate the spread of diseases like HIV and offer resources to people with substance misuse disorders. Congress should move to legalize marijuana, expunge all drug-related records, and allow safe consumption sites for illegal substances, lawmakers said in a new House resolution that was introduced on Thursday. Representative Ayanna Pressley, Democrat of Massachusetts, is leading the measure, which calls for a series of policy changes that are meant to reduce mass incarceration and broadly reform the country's criminal justice system. She introduced an initial version of the resolution last Congress as well with the same drug-related language, but it did not advance.
We should provide care for those in crisis, not confine them in solitary. We should house our immigrant neighbors, not deport them from their communities. We should counsel our kids, not lock them up in prison. The People's Justice Guarantee offers these solutions and many others in a robust framework for a humane, equitable, and just legal system.
Amid protracted negotiations between New York State lawmakers and Governor Andrew Cuomo over how to legalize marijuana in the state, U.S. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is siding with the legislature. In a statement posted to Twitter late Tuesday, Schumer thanked New York Assembly Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes and Senator Liz Krueger, the lawmakers behind the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. Schumer said he was, quote, glad that all sides are working hard to push this over the finish line, but did not mention Cuomo by name. The governor is currently embroiled in a number of scandals, including allegations of sexual harassment, and is facing growing calls for his resignation. Legalizing marijuana in New York, Schumer said, quote, will only add momentum to our vital efforts to reform marijuana laws at the federal level, end quote. A majority of New Yorkers want marijuana to be legalized for adult use, according to a new poll, and they further favor allowing home delivery, cultivation for personal use, and letting retail and cultivation facilities operate in their neighborhoods. The poll from Consensus Strategies asked New York residents about a variety of cannabis-related issues, including those related to social equity and licensing. It found that 61% of New York adults support recreational marijuana legalization. 56% of respondents said they would be okay with having retail marijuana businesses in their communities, while 53% support allowing cultivation facilities near their homes. Another 53% said they favor permitting cannabis businesses to deliver products to consumers. In terms of home cultivation, 52% said that adults should be able to grow a limited number of plants for personal use. A top New York senator is signaling that Governor Andrew Cuomo has conceded to lawmakers amid ongoing marijuana legalization negotiations on at least two key provisions of proposed legislation. Senate Finance Committee Chairwoman Liz Krueger said in a new radio interview that she's, quote, extremely pleased with the agreement that we have come to, end quote, with the governor when it comes to giving adults a home grow option and how to allocate cannabis tax revenue for social equity purposes. Her bill, the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, would let people grow a limited number of plants for personal use, whereas Cuomo's reform plan, which he included in his annual budget request, would continue to criminalize people for cultivating their own cannabis. Advocates also prefer the legislature's approach to social equity funding, which they believe will lead to a steady and ongoing stream of support for communities most impacted by the war on drugs. Governor Jay Inslee was asked by a political reporter last week, with 7 years hindsight, whether he'd have changed anything about Washington state's marijuana legalization.
What I would say is that our experience in Washington has been uniformly positive. On any way you score this, from a reduction of unnecessary law enforcement and criminal activity that really wasn't benefiting our community, on creating jobs in a new industry, on giving people more freedom in their personal decision making with no demonstrable, horrendous health impacts. It's been shown by this. So by any measure, it's been a very successful enterprise. As far as the things I'd do differently, I probably would have embraced this position of decriminalizing it earlier had I known how successful this has been, with not any really large increase in juvenile usage, which was a concern while we were debating this.
Nebraska Governor Pete Ricketts made some surprising comments last week about the medical marijuana legislation being proposed for the state.
So this is a dangerous drug that will impact our kids. If you legalize marijuana, you're going to kill your kids. That's what the data shows from around the country.
Marijuana is incapable of killing its users from fatal overdose. Governor Ricketts was suggesting that increases in marijuana use among teens who had committed suicide was to blame for their deaths. Researchers note that there is no causal relationship demonstrated there. It could be that teens are self-medicating conditions like depression or trauma that correlate to higher suicide rates. The Nebraska legislature is currently considering a tightly regulated medical marijuana bill in hopes of forestalling a proposed medical marijuana initiative that simply grants all Nebraskans the constitutional right to use cannabis in all its forms as medicine. During a marathon hearing that stretched into the early hours on Thursday, a New Mexico Senate panel narrowly approved a bill to legalize marijuana, setting up a floor vote with just days to go before the end of the legislative session. The Senate Judiciary Committee advanced the measure, House Bill 12, on a 5-4 vote, with Chairman Joe Cervantes siding with the panel's 3 Republican members in opposition. Many saw the Judiciary Committee, where a similar legalization bill died last year, as the legislation's biggest obstacle on its path to becoming law. The proposal has already passed the House of Representatives last month and earned the backing of key Senate leaders. Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham has also repeatedly called for the policy change and included legalization in her 2021 legislative agenda. A bill to legalize marijuana in North Dakota that passed the House last month received its first hearing in a Senate committee on Monday, with debate centering mostly on who would shape the policy change that most observers increasingly see as inevitable, the legislature or voters. With activists already mounting a signature-gathering campaign to place a ballot initiative before voters in 2022 that would amend the state constitution to legalize cannabis for adult use, legislators are now faced with a quandary. They could wait and see how that process unfolds, or they can advance more restrictive reform legislation sponsored by a Republican lawmaker who doesn't even personally support ending prohibition. Quote, "I've said several times I never smoked marijuana. I don't believe in marijuana, but I also believe that I'd rather have us have good legislation than to put it in the Constitution," end quote, Representative Jason Doctor said in opening comments. Optimism abounds as Connecticut lawmakers work to advance a bill to legalize marijuana, House Speaker Matthew Ritter said on Tuesday. Ritter made the comment during a virtual press briefing alongside Majority Leader Jason Rojas and Judiciary Co-Chair Stephen Staffstrom after the lawmakers were asked about the state of negotiations in the legislature to reconcile various pieces of cannabis legislation, including a plan put forward by Governor Ned Lamont last month. Rojas said he, quote, "wouldn't say we're close, but we're not far off either," adding that, quote, "in principle, equity is important to both the administration and the legislature, and we're going to work through those details," end quote. To that end, the majority leader said that working groups have been formed in the Democratic caucuses of the House and Senate to go through the governor's proposal and a separate legalization bill introduced in the House Labor and Public Employees Committee last month. Delaware lawmakers on Thursday introduced a much-anticipated bill to legalize marijuana in the state, though the governor's ongoing concerns about the policy change continue to represent an obstacle. The legislation, sponsored by Representative Ed Osienski, would establish a regulated cannabis market and allow adults 21 and older to purchase and possess up to 1 ounce of marijuana. It would not provide a home cultivation option, however. Osienski was the chief sponsor of an earlier reform bill that cleared a House committee in 2019, but did not advance through the full chamber. The proposal has since been modified, and it's set to go before the House Health and Human Development Committee on March 24th. The bill calls for the appointment of a marijuana commissioner, which would issue regulations and licenses. The state's Department of Safety and Homeland Security and Division of Alcohol and Tobacco Enforcement would also have regulatory responsibilities. A bipartisan bill aiming to reduce existing fines for possessing cannabis is getting another shot in the Wisconsin Assembly. The bill would reduce fines for possession of up to 10 grams of cannabis from no more than $1,000 to $100, while eliminating the 6 months of imprisonment that may come with that charge under current law. Wisconsin has become an island surrounded by U.S. states and an international neighbor to the north with legalized cannabis. This reality has compelled some lawmakers on both the state and local levels to continue to push for reformative policies. Governor Tony Evers has rekindled efforts to bring cannabis legalization in the upcoming state budget, pointing to it as a possible significant boost to Wisconsin's ailing economy. Republican leadership, however, remains generally resistant to cannabis reform in Wisconsin and has declared his budget dead on arrival, including full legalization. A majority of Florida voters support legalizing marijuana for adult use and expanding access to medical cannabis, according to a new poll. And as state lawmakers pursue legislation to cap THC potency of marijuana products, the survey also shows a majority of their constituents oppose the proposal. The marijuana reform group Florida for Care commissioned the poll, which found that 59% of Floridians back recreational legalization, 58% want to expand access to medical cannabis, and 58% are opposed to imposing restrictions on THC content in marijuana. The survey also showed that the state's medical cannabis program has grown in popularity over the past 5 years, since 71% of voters approved it via a 2016 ballot initiative. Now, 76% of respondents say they are supportive of allowing patients to access medical marijuana. 3 bills regarding marijuana regulations in Denver were passed through the Finance and Governance Committee Tuesday after narrowly surviving an attempted delay. If approved by the City Council, the bills will allow marijuana delivery and marijuana hospitality businesses within Denver and provide $350,000 to the Department of Excise and Licenses for the implementation of the new marijuana business licenses. Delivery licenses would only be available to social equity applicants until 2024. Licenses for stores, transporters, cultivators, manufacturing, and the new hospitality establishments would be limited to social equity applicants until 2027. Social equity applicants are defined as Colorado residents who have never had a marijuana license revoked and meet one of the following social equity criteria. Applicant lived in an opportunity zone or disproportionately impacted area between 1980 and 2010. Applicant or immediate family was arrested, convicted, or suffered civil asset forfeiture due to a marijuana offense, or applicant's household income did not exceed 50% of the state median income. A New Hampshire Senate committee on Wednesday heard testimony on a House-passed bill to allow medical marijuana patients to grow a limited number of plants for personal use. And unlike in past sessions, this time the legislation is being backed by all 3 of the state's licensed cannabis centers. Representative Dennis Acton is sponsoring the measure, HB 350, which would enable registered patients to cultivate up to 6 plants, only 3 of which could be mature, and 12 seedlings. The bill moved out of the House Health, Human Services, and Elderly Affairs Committee on a 20-1 vote last month and then cleared the full chamber in a voice vote on the consent calendar. Historically, the state's alternative treatment centers, which operate a total of 5 dispensaries, have either opposed or remained neutral on the reform. That isn't the case this round. Prime ATC, Sanctuary ATC, and Temescal Wellness all testified in favor of the legislation on Wednesday in front of the Senate Health and Human Services Committee. A wide range of psychedelics such as psilocybin and ayahuasca are now officially the lowest local law enforcement priority in the nation's capital as of Monday. That's the result of a ballot measure that Washington, D.C. voters approved in November to decriminalize plant and fungi-based entheogens. But some activists who are behind the voter initiative aren't stopping now that their initial policy reform has gone into effect. The Plant Medicine Coalition is now pushing the District Council to enact additional legislation to provide worker and child protections related to the use of plant and fungi-based substances. And they're asking the city to issue guidance to law enforcement about the implications of the new current policy. Activists with the organization, which was founded in January, also have plans to lobby Congress on psychedelics issues from their headquarters in the nation's capital. Vermont lawmakers have unveiled legislation to end criminal penalties around small amounts of illegal drugs in the state. Under a bill introduced on Wednesday, possession and dispensation of personal use amounts of drugs would instead be subject to a fine of up to $50 or a referral to a substance use screening and health service. The bill would establish a Drug Use Standards Advisory Board within the state health department, which would be responsible for setting personal use dosage and personal use supply amounts of regulated drugs. People caught with less than the personal use supply would be subject to a civil penalty of no more than $50. A person could avoid the fine by instead agreeing to participate in a screening for substance use disorder, which would refer them to treatment or other services if necessary. Someone previously diagnosed with substance use disorder could avoid the penalty by providing evidence of that diagnosis to the court. 6 Rhode Island senators introduced legislation last week that would end criminal penalties for possessing small amounts of drugs and instead impose a $100 civil fine, the latest state-level effort to stop imprisoning people for simple drug possession offenses. The bill, S-604, would not legalize the substances, but it would significantly reduce penalties for possessing them. Under current state law, possession is classified as a crime and subject to up to 3 years imprisonment and as much as $5,000 in fines. S-604 would replace those penalties with a $100 civil fine and no threat of jail time. The bill also bars law enforcement from arresting people for possessing drugs, although individuals could still be arrested if they fail to truthfully identify themselves to police for a citation. Fines would double if not paid within 30 days and double again after 90 days. This has been your Cannabis Headline News for the week ending Friday, March 19th, 2021. I'm Russ Belville. Cannabis Headline News is heard at the top of every hour on Radical Russ Radio, and Friday's news is contained within the free Russ Belville Show live podcast. For daily downloads of Cannabis Headline News podcast to your device every morning, Subscribe by becoming a patron of Radical Russ Radio. And of course, we've got the Cannabis Headline News podcast available to subscribers at Patreon. You can get that news daily by 9 a.m. Mountain Time for just $4.20 a month. That sound means that it's 4:20 here in the Mountain Time Zone. Time for us to take our union-mandated safety briefing. And when we return, we're going to take a look at that study about pot and PTSD among veterans, how it was framed, and what's the real story behind it. Also, a look at Ammon Bundy in the state of Idaho, learning what marijuana consumers have long known. Jail sucks. Hi, I'm Radical Russ Belville. You know me. I'm from Idaho, where we've got 2 strains of marijuana, got some and don't. But until I can help legalize marijuana in the Gem State, I can still bring you the best the hemp plant has to offer at Boise Hemp World. Boise Hemp World features the Mama Duck line of CBD tinctures and pain creams and the Billy Dogs line of CBD pet tinctures and dog treats. Hemp World also features CBD candy, gummies, gum, spices, and a whole assortment of tie-dye and hemp clothing and accessories. And under the laws of America's last absolute prohibition state, all Hemp World CBD products are 100% THC free, so you won't fail any drug screenings. Boise Hemp World, now with 2 locations, our flagship store at 6928 West State Street in the Glenwood Shopping Center, and our new location at 1720 West State Street in the Albertson Shopping Center. We're also the headquarters for the Idaho Cannabis Coalition's campaign to legalize medical marijuana in 2022. Find us online at boisehempworld.com or call us toll-free at 844-IDA-HEMP and tell them Radical Russ sent you.
You're listening to The Russ Belville Show.
As a freshman member of the Oregon legislature, I was able to vote as my state was the first to decriminalize.
You can find Radical Russ online everywhere.
The I Am Cannabis Sativa podcast is now replaying on Radical Russ Radio. Join host Dan Scotland for a review of the news and events in the cannabis community with frequent updates throughout the week. Visit IamCannabisSativa.com to subscribe and check RadicalRuss.com/schedule for show replay times. Now, as a service to listeners considering the use of pharmaceutical medications that, unlike marijuana, are approved for medical use by the Federal Food and Drug Administration, the Russ Belville Show presents the Big Pharma Ad of the Day.
Herb quit smoking with Chantix and support. Talk to your doctor about Chantix and a support plan that's right for you. Some people have had changes in behavior, hostility, agitation, depressed mood, and suicidal thoughts or actions while taking or after stopping Chantix.
Whoa, wait, hold up. Trying to quit smoking with this drug could make me belligerent or suicidal?
If you notice agitation, hostility, depression, or changes in behavior, thinking, or mood that are not typical for you, or if you develop suicidal thoughts or actions, stop taking Chantix and call your doctor right away.
You don't say.
Talk to your doctor about any history of depression or other
medical
mental health
marijuana,
problems, which can get
not approved by the FDA, but smoking it won't cause lung cancer or make you want to kill anybody. While humans have been using cannabis for medicinal purposes for over 5,000 years, medical science is only beginning to unlock the secrets of the endocannabinoid system and the promise of cannabinoid medicines. Join us now for the latest cannabinoid medicine update. Well, this week we had the results of a study that 10 years in the making, folks. It took 7 years for the researchers to even get the approval to do this study, and another 3 years to conduct the study itself. And it has to do with the effectiveness of medical cannabis for veterans who are suffering from post-traumatic stress injuries. And it's long been known anecdotally that veterans are using cannabis to self-medicate the symptoms of post-traumatic stress. And a number of states have approved it as a qualifying condition for medical cannabis to access the programs, to get a card.
And then, of course, there's states that have legalized it altogether for all adults, and it's just an over-the-counter medicine for vets that might be treating PTSD. But this has been a question as to whether or not there's been actual studies on it, and one of the researchers is Dr. Sue Sisley from the Scottsdale Research Institute, and full disclosure, a friend of mine. I've known Dr. Sisley for quite a while and have interviewed her a number of times with respect to this very subject. So I was very intrigued when I saw the reports coming across this week about the results of this study. One headline said, "New PTSD study finds cannabis safe, but not as effective as assumed." Then I saw another headline that said, "Short-term use of cannabis safe, but no more effective than placebo for PTSD." And a third headline read, "FDA-regulated study shows promise for using marijuana to treat veterans with PTSD." So which is it? It was a little confusing. Was it no good? Was it as good as placebo? Or was it better than placebo? So I dug a little deeper into this, and I actually called Dr. Sisley and had a chat about this. And we learned a few things. First of all, that the study itself divided 76 people, veterans with PTSD, mostly men, into 4 groups. One group got 12% THC marijuana. Another group got 11% CBD marijuana with a slight amount of THC. Third group got a 1-to-1 THC CBD balance that was 8% THC to 8% CBD. And a fourth group got a placebo that had no active THC or CBD in it, right? So that's a double-blind kind of deal. We're figuring out, does THC help? Does CBD help? Does balanced THC CBD help? And compare it to a control group that's getting Wizard Puff or Tootie Smoke or whatever that fake stuff they used to sell in the High Times magazine back in the day. So in this study, first of all, the first thing that jumps out at you is 12% marijuana? Really? That's your medical marijuana, 12%. And this is the biggest problem when we're talking about this study, is they're dealing with marijuana that's grown by the U.S. government for the National Institutes of Drug Abuse at the University of Mississippi, Ole Miss. This is the federal government's pot farm that's been in operation since the 70s, I believe, in accordance with the United Nations treatings on the study of cannabis. And of course, they grow this cannabis. It's lousy cannabis, and not only that, not only is it lousy, but they don't process it well. It's not hand manicured buds, man. It's just cut down the whole stalk and the whole tree and throw it into a chipper and just grind the whole thing up. So this cannabis you get back that's 12% THC allegedly is also full of stems and seeds and husks and leaf, and it's just, even if it had enough THC in it, it wouldn't be a pleasant smoke. And furthermore, when they actually tested this, and this is according to the article in Leafly, Bruce Kennedy wrote this one, when they actually tested the 12% THC marijuana from NIDA, it only tested at 9%. So you had lab inflation, even with the National Institutes of Drug Abuse. Who knows what the THC CBD balanced one was that was supposedly 8%? Yeah, who knows what that came in at? So you give veterans marijuana that's barely better than placebo, and you're surprised when the results are barely better than placebo. But the good news in this is how this got framed. The first story, the Leafly story, kind of frames it in a negative light. It's not effective as assumed. The second story came from military.com. No more effective than placebo, so as good. But the third story came from Military Times, saying it showed promise. And this is the framing that I think should be taken away from this study. The first FDA-regulated placebo-controlled double-blind study on smoked cannabis among veterans with diagnosed PTSD revealed improvements among those receiving doses with higher levels of THC, an active component in the herbal drug. That's the lead paragraph. And I think that's the right way to look at this, because while it wasn't a statistically significant difference between placebo and these other amounts, it did rise a little bit. There was, and since we're talking about a THC level that's not anywhere in the range of what people are getting from dispensaries these days, 24% would be more realistic. The best part of this study is finding that it was safe and that there was no issues in this, and so that they can move forward with another study, move forward to a different level, and maybe with the passage of some laws at the federal level, be able to use actual medical cannabis, use products that the people are currently using in medical practice, more potent products, so that we can get a realistic idea of what veterans are using and how much it actually works for them. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to come deep into America's last absolute prohibition state. News from the state of Idaho, my home, about Ammon Bundy. You know this guy. We'll tell you all about him. And he learned a terrible lesson that jail really sucks. It's no fun to be in jail. Plus, coming up at the end of this hour, we've got a radical rant. Drug War Joe Biden is at it again. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, apparently. Not only is he firing staffers for past marijuana use, new audio, new interview comes out with an Iowa campaign staffer, part of the transition team, who said how Biden is focused on not supporting marijuana legalization because he thought it might cost him votes. The guy who got fewer votes in Montana, South Dakota, and Arizona than marijuana did thinks marijuana would cost him votes. Hi, I'm Radical Russ Belville, the sole producer of this 24-hour marijuana music and cannabis conversation stream I call Radical Russ Radio. As part of my mission to educate and entertain people about the need to end adult marijuana prohibition, I produce the Russ Belville Show podcast every week, available absolutely free wherever you get your podcasts. For those of you who'd like to help support my mission financially, you can become a Radical Russ Radio VIP at patreon.com/radicalruss or by clicking the link for Toker Talk Radio in the main menu. For just $4.20 a month, VIPs will receive the exclusive download of Hour 2 of my podcast, Toker Talk Radio, every week, as well as the 5-minute cannabis headline news every weekday. Upgrade to the $14.20 a month tier, and you'll get those podcasts and a set of custom patriotic pro-marijuana stickers from me every quarter. And if you can afford to support Radical Russ Radio at $44.20 a month, you get my podcast, and each quarter you receive a poster, then a mug, then a t-shirt, and finally a hoodie that proclaim your support for ending adult marijuana prohibition. I literally cannot do this without you. Your support enables me to continue my life's work, and I thank you for it. Visit patreon.com/radicalruss and become a Radical Russ Radio VIP today.
For Cannabis Shakespearean Theatre, I'm Leonard Pinthgarnell III. Tonight we bring you another classic of the cannabis cinema as interpreted by the Royal Cannabis Shakespearean Theatre Company, 1995's Friday. In this scene, Smokey, played by Chris Tucker, and Craig, played by Ice Cube, are sitting on their stoop, enjoying a cannabis cigarette when they are approached by Felicia, a vagrant consumed by an addiction to cocaine. Enjoy!
What doth thee wanteth?
Oh, verily, I require loan of thine carriage.
What kind of horror is yond? Sugar wouldst be a common request. Ketchup, perhaps. Thou requesteth mine carriage? Hell nay! Begone with thou!
Prithee, sir, bequeath me a reefer?
Thou needest to bequeath employment with thine destitute buttocks. Always one finds thou in theft of others' stash. Begone with thou, Felicia!
Forever shall I recall that.
Recall it, transcribe it, paint it. I have nary a fuck to give.
Craig?
Begone, Felicia.
For Cannabis Shakespearean Theatre, I'm Leonard Pinthgarnell III.
You're not high. You're listening to the Russ Belville Show.
Marijuana is probably the most dangerous drug.
Okay, well, maybe you're high, too.
Radical Russ here, reminding you that marijuana legalization doesn't just happen. Smart, dedicated activists have put their freedom and future on the line to make it happen. Like the activists at SSDP, Students for Sensible Drug Policy. SSDP alumni are now leaders in marijuana journalism at Marijuana Moment, Marijuana Government in Massachusetts, and even leading the Drug Policy Alliance.
Get involved with the SSDP chapter on your college campus or form one. Everything you need to get started can be found at ssdp.org. And keep it here on Radical Russ Radio for conversations with leaders from this organization, the best marijuana music, and the latest news about cannabis.
The world of cannabis is evolving at a frenetic pace. The Russ Belville Show gets behind the headlines to take a deeper look at breaking news in our Cannabis Focus.
Well, here in Idaho, we have an infamous resident who gains national notoriety from time to time, Ammon Bundy. He is the Emmett, Idaho man who's infamous for having stormed and occupied the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in eastern Oregon in a standoff that resulted in the killing of one of his followers by police. And he's complaining about the conditions that he's suffering in the Ada County Jail. He says, quote, "There is just no way I can defend myself in this position," Bundy said, telling the judge that he had been held in a holding cell at the jail and not allowed to make phone calls or speak to a lawyer. Continuing, quote, "The circumstances are pretty miserable here. I just ask that you consider my desire, I think my right, to a fair trial. You know, I've never threatened anybody, and I never asked anybody to threaten anybody. It's not what I do." End quote. Yeah, this is quotes from the Idaho Statesman, the paper, reporting on Bundy's arrest. And he got arrested because he refused to wear a mask. So what happened is, remember that this is a guy who led an armed hostile takeover of a federal building. I never threatened anybody. I never asked people to threaten anybody. He led an armed hostile takeover of a federal building. And before that, in his dad's case, he helped to lead an armed standoff that literally drew sniper positions on federal agents. I never asked anybody to threaten anybody. Well, now he's in jail. He's in jail on a $10,000 bond. And the reason why is because another incident, he led an armed group that stormed the Idaho Capitol just this year. Well, he refused to wear a face mask to go appear for his charge. And the court has ruled that, you have to, not ruled, but they've declared a rule that you got to wear a face mask. We're in the middle of a pandemic. He's one of these anti-mask guys, so he refused to wear a face mask, so they wouldn't let him in the court. And then he didn't show up, so the judge had him arrested for failure to appear. But not everybody that gets arrested in Ada County and booked into that jail this week gets national headlines. There's a 20-year-old woman who got booked in that jail this week, whose sole offense was getting caught smoking a pipe with some marijuana in it. Literally, misdemeanor marijuana possession, misdemeanor paraphernalia possession. There's a 23-year-old man who got booked in the jail this week whose late-night party got too loud and police found some marijuana. He was booked on misdemeanor marijuana possession and a disturbing the peace violation at like 1 or 2 in the morning. And this week, there was a 21-year-old man who was pulled over driving one morning and police found some marijuana. So he got a marijuana charge and a driving under the influence charge. We don't know the whole story because these people don't have an army of followers with their cell phone cameras streaming live that get picked up by the Washington Post and CNN. So I'm just guessing that's what happened to these people, all below the ages of 24. These 3 young people were booked into the same miserable jail as Ammon Bundy. They too deserve a right to a fair trial, and being in jail makes their defense harder. And unlike Bundy, none of them, at least to our knowledge, have ever threatened anybody or asked anyone to threaten anybody. Oh, you know who else got booked in the Ada County Jail this week? Same week as those young marijuana consumers and may have had to sit in the holding cell with them or near them. 4 people charged with felony domestic abuse. 2 people charged for first-degree murder with sadistic inclinations. And 2 others that were accused of child molestation. That's what's still going on in the state of Idaho. People getting picked up for marijuana and put in cages with murderers and child molesters and domestic abusers and Ammon Bundy. 16 states and the District of Columbia have already declared that marijuana is legal for adults, and 9 more have decriminalized possession to some degree, at least first possession little amounts. So getting caught smoking a joint in half the United States will not get you put in a cage. And 3/4 of the western states, out of the 13 states in the West, only Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah will still lock you up. New Mexico, I guess New Mexico too, but they're going to pass legalization before the end of this legislative session. Hawaii, I suppose, but they've got New Mexico and Hawaii have decriminalization. I stand corrected by myself. I forgot they're decriminalized. So yes, only Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah. And Wyoming is discussing a marijuana legalization bill brought up by the Republicans there. So why are we still jailing people for marijuana? Why are we still ruining people's lives in the state of Idaho over marijuana? Well, I can tell you why, but that's going to take a whole lot longer segment. You can check out my report on that Ammon Bundy arrest at my new advocacy website, idahocan.co, part of the Idaho Cannabis Coalition. You can find it at idahocann.co, like Cannabis Coalition. Going to take a break, and when we come back, drug war Joe Biden is at it again. We run down how he's firing staffers who admitted marijuana use in legal states in the nation's capital where marijuana is legal. Plus, we've got some audio from an organizer in Iowa who was part of the Sanders-Biden transition team. That was kind of the group that was put together to kind of soothe people's feelings on the far left, the Bernie Sanders supporters, make sure that Biden would be somewhat progressive. Well, we got some insider information on how Biden tamped down any thought of putting legalization in the platform. So, all that coming up on the rest of this first hour of the Russ Belville Show.
The Coffee Pod in Sumter, Oregon is your fast, friendly marijuana shop nestled in the beautiful Elkhorn Mountain Range outside of Baker City. We're serving Eastern Oregon and Idaho's Treasure Valley with the selection of flower, pre-rolls, vapes, dab, and edibles you need at the prices that make it well worth the drive. Don't venture to some well-watched parking lot in some border town dispensary just to take a number and wait in a long line for your cannabis products. Make the drive to the Coffee Pot in Sumter and deal one-on-one with your bud tender with no waiting. See, feel, and smell the products you're after and make your purchase knowing your tax dollars are helping a small tourist community that needs it. Plus, every dollar you spend is a point toward our Bong Bucks program that earns you coupons on glass and accessories. The Coffee Pot also honors our military, seniors, teachers, and first responders with a 10% discount. And as always, OMMP patients pay no 20% tax. Come on up to the Coffee Pot in Sumter, the first business on the left, on the side of the 2-story log cabin restaurant, and tell them Radical Russ sent you.
And now, Puff Pass Ponder with Radical Russ. Some people call heroin dope, and some people call marijuana dope. Before you buy, make sure your dealer knows which is which. This has been Puff Pass Ponder with Radical Russ.
This is Russ Belville for Cannabis Headline News. Get the day's top 5 news stories in marijuana in just 5 minutes every weekday with Cannabis Headline News. Available now to paid subscribers at patreon.com/radicalruss or listen at the top of every hour on the 24-hour Radical Russ radio stream at radicalruss.com.
must wage what I have called total war against public enemy number one.
I support a change in law to end federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
That marijuana, pot, grass, whatever you want to call it, is probably the most dangerous drug.
Some think there won't be room for them in jail. We'll make room.
I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it and didn't inhale.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
Entirely legitimate topic for debate.
Radical Rant.
Drug war Joe Biden is at it again. The report this morning from the Daily Beast, getting the scoop on this one, talking about how a number of staffers are fired by the Biden administration, despite earlier promises that they would not be fired. The headline is Biden White House sandbags staffers, sidelines dozens for pot use. Several staffers were informally told by transition officials that some past marijuana use would be overlooked, only to be told later that they were being asked to resign. The report says the policy has even affected staffers whose marijuana use was exclusive to one of the 14 states and the District of Columbia where cannabis is legal. Sources familiar with the matter also said a number of young staffers were either put on probation or canned because they revealed past marijuana use in an official document they filled out as part of the lengthy background check for a position in the Biden White House. Now, apparently this policy does not apply to Biden's Vice President, Kamala Harris, who admitted on the Breakfast Club program that she used to smoke marijuana back in the day, although she kind of misplaced who she might have been listening to at the time. Of course, Biden himself is famously a teetotaler. He doesn't even drink. The second straight president, or at least allegedly, who supposedly did not use marijuana or even alcohol. And Biden, he does recount, lots of alcoholism in his family, and he didn't want to go down that route. And that's fine. Anyone can make the decision for their own life that they want to make. But I've found over time in doing this job that the prohibitionists who come from a background of hard drug abuse, where people have been alcoholics or had dependencies on cocaine or heroin, tend to be the most reefer mad in their prohibition stance. Tend to look at marijuana as a gateway drug and hold on to these antiquated notions. And this, of course, is a huge problem for these staffers who were fired, and it just represents, as Representative Earl Blumenauer is quoted as saying, an antiquated notion. It's an antiquated look at how this should affect people. And I just don't understand, back in the day when marijuana was 100% illegal everywhere, I suppose you could make a national security point that someone who's hiding their use of an illegal substance could be, leveraged, could be vulnerable to blackmail of some sort. I'm straining to give a point there that maybe that could be a legitimate reason back in the day for banning people from government service. But now these young people are starting their careers in Washington, in politics, and they're going to get dinged for being honest about their marijuana use in a state where it was legal. There's no more leverage now. There's no more, we can blackmail you because we can tell people you smoked a joint. They're doing something that's legal. I can't think of a single reason why you would discriminate against people for their marijuana use now any more than you discriminate against them for drinking a beer. Now, if you did some background checking and found someone was an alcoholic, maybe, or if you did some background checking and found their marijuana use was problematic, maybe, but merely asserting that they had used marijuana. Now, this is blowing up, of course. It's gone beyond the Daily Beast. It's getting, into the mainstream media because, the Biden administration, especially compared to the last one, has been boring. Refreshingly boring. I want my government to be boring to some extent. But been boring from a media perspective is now they're just antsy. They're just looking for anything to be able to promote. And this idea of Biden being out of step and out of touch with his own party is gaining traction, especially when we know that there's so many progressive, even as, New York State is now arguing for marijuana legalization, and Chuck Schumer, as the Senate Majority Leader, has to weigh in on things like that and say that he supports the more liberal version that includes home grow. And Chuck Schumer's, no spring chicken. Joe Biden's like the only one still remaining that we can't bring across the finish line when it comes to understanding the need for legalization. So this is not an isolated story, because the other story that's come out, and it's not quite gotten as much traction, I think, but I think it also paints the bigger picture of Drug War Joe. Let's not forget, this is the author of the crime bill. This is the guy who created the drug czar's office. That was his idea, to make a cabinet level office of the drug czar. So he's never met a drug war that he didn't want to fight. And a lot of us here were saying throughout the campaign that, yeah, we want to beat Trump, absolutely, but let's not have any illusions that our fight is over with a Biden administration. It's going to be a push. I mean, I could see him vetoing something like the MORE Act if it got too liberal. I can see him negotiating, saying, oh, the MORE Act needs to not deschedule, but just reschedule. Just drop it down to Schedule 3 or 2 or something like that. So we still got a lot of fight at the federal level. And nothing illustrates this more than this other story about, and a great headline at Marijuana Moment, Biden worried endorsing legal marijuana would lead to a Trump win. And the story talks to Stacey Walker. And Stacey Walker's African-American man, Lynn County, Iowa. So, not the blackest place in the world, Iowa, but he's in Lynn County, Iowa. He's a supervisor that was recruited for a joint task force to inform the Biden criminal justice platform before he was nominated last summer. And he's in this new video from More Perfect Union, and you can find their Twitter feed at More Perfect US. More Perfect US. And Stacey Walker is speaking with Faiz Shakir, I think is his name. Yes, former Bernie Sanders campaign manager, Faiz Shakir, and interviewing him with respect to the criminal justice policies, trying to put together a criminal justice platform for who was then not even the nominee, still working to become the nominee. And this is Iowa. The guy, Iowa is the first campaign, the first election that you have in the primaries, right? So early on in the campaign, trying to develop the platform for Joe Biden. And remember that until South Carolina came around, Joe Biden was placing fourth and fifth. He was losing to Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders, right? He was thought to be lost. So he's putting together his campaign platform. And Stacey Walker's in this interview talking about how Biden was so reticent to put marijuana legalization in the platform.
There was that sort of battle, if you will. President Biden at that time had a view on cannabis legalization that was out of step with the majority of his party. I mean, this is an issue that Republicans are now starting to come around to.
And so what was it about Biden that was out of step? What did he think was the problem with marijuana?
That was the exact conversation. If you want to be real, we were armed with polling data that suggested that a majority of Americans were in favor of the legalization of marijuana. But Vice President Biden at the time was really concerned about how this issue could have impacted the outcome of the election.
So Biden's worried that he's going to lose votes by supporting marijuana legalization? It's already a 50-50 issue with Republicans, and it's got super majority support among Democrats and independents. Who does he think he's going to lose votes with?
It became a question of how do we present this to the head of the party now, and I say this respectfully, who has a view that is perhaps outdated and out of step with his party.
outdated and out of step with the party. How do you get this through Joe Biden's head? And Stacey Walker talks about bringing him polls, showing him the polls that it doesn't affect people's voting. It's not going to hurt you. So what problem did the Biden folks seem to have with the idea of legalization?
I think there was a political calculation there being made that working class people didn't want to deal in these issues of cannabis legalization because for far too long people have made a link between cannabis legalization and black folks.
He says that in the nicest way possible, doesn't he? Working class voters. What he's talking about is Joe Biden realized his whole election coming down to him and Trump was, could he beat Trump with the working class vote? They always talk about that working class vote, which is a code word for the white vote, which is weird because working class people may be disproportionately black and brown. But regardless, whenever you hear that in politics, the working class vote, we got to catch the working class vote. They're talking about white dudes, undereducated white guys. So this thought that Biden didn't want to bring up legalization because it's associated with black folks and might scare away some of his demographics, some of the working class white vote, is kind of shocking to me. We're afraid of scaring the white folks with this talk about legalization and racial equity and black people being disproportionately busted 4-1, 5-1, 10-1 in some states like Iowa.
And what I honestly think the majority of Americans want to hear is an affirmative position on the legalization of cannabis and an action plan to get us there.
That's what we want. That is exactly what we want. People of all colors, all races, all economic backgrounds, ideologies, ages, sexual orientations, name the demographic, we all want some level of marijuana legalization, at least medical use. And for Joe Biden to be so stuck in his 1980s drug war mindset, it boggles the mind because it's hard for me to even think that he literally believes this. Like, he's got to be bowing to some sort of, monetary forces, political forces. It's like dark matter. You don't know it's there, but you can infer its presence by its effect on everything around it. There's no rational reason for Joe Biden to be this anti-marijuana when his party is so for it and the rest of the country is for it. He's just going to play kick the can down the road.
President Biden wanted to commit more study to this before making a decision.
But
we know that the longer we wait on taking meaningful action at the federal level, the more people we're going to lock up, the more lives we're going to ruin, the more we're going to perpetuate the disturbingly unfair war on drugs. Here in my state, we know that white folks use cannabis in equal amounts as people of color, although people of color are 10 times more likely to be arrested and prosecuted for those crimes. But the fact of the matter is this has been studied, and we have medical professionals, we have scientists who are telling us that this drug is safe and it is useful.
I mean, this political calculation was obviously wrong, and it worked out for Biden anyway because Jim Clyburn, Representative Clyburn, saved him and endorsed him and got the South Carolina vote, and by a large degree, black voters saved Joe Biden. As a matter of practicality, who would white voters support over Donald Trump? And they were right. That all being said, we are still dealing with drug war Joe Biden, who got fewer votes in Montana, in South Dakota, and in Arizona, states that are red states. He got fewer votes than marijuana legalization did. So I can't believe that any intelligent political operatives these days are advising Joe Biden to be this way. It's just really got to be in his heart. There's no logic behind it. It's just the madness of prohibition. And who knows, are we going to be able to get Joe Biden cured of this reefer madness over the next 4 years? I think there's enough momentum. We get the Safe Banking Act passed, that's going to help. Get the MORE Act passed would help a whole lot more. Stay tuned. We got more coming up in hour 2. Home grow rights and THC caps. That's in the news. Plus, a look at Idaho legislature's assault on petition rights, and an update on that Idaho cop who was high as fuck. That's a quote. We'll tell you what happened to him. Not much. Thanks for joining us. For everyone here in Idaho, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, take care of each other, tokers.